Hey everyone, welcome to TFC Daily. This is an initiative by the team at the Financial Coconut to keep you company during this tough time. So follow us on our social, check out all our podcasts for your continued learning enjoyment. Simply head to thefinancialcoconut.com for more details. We have different segments scheduled for you. Every Thursday will be our Finding Our Edge segment where we focus on shaping your career. Career is a big part of our lives and things are changing rapidly. So we want to give you the latest happenings, practices, and give you that edge to thrive in the career market. My name is Adrian and I'm your host today at Finding Your Edge. I'm a former HR entrepreneur turned strategist for future of work. And today we are very fortunate to have our esteemed guest, Sam Neo. A bit about Sam. He's currently a founder of two startups, the first being People Mentality Inc., one of APAC's top 10 HR and employer branding consultancy firm that helps organizations become an employer of choice. While his recent venture, Stories of Asia, is a storyteller incubator that was set up to empower the Asian community with a voice through storytelling. Sam is a HR professional with accelerated experience in market-leading companies such as Keppel, Changi Airport Group. His burning passion for HR has seen him take on a diverse range of roles in area of employer branding, talent management, CSR, talent acquisition, and employee engagement. As a trusted advisor, he has worked with leaders in various large reputable organizations such as Samsung, L'Oreal, Prudential, and many more. Besides securing MOM National HR Scholarship in 2011, Sam's contribution in the HR community were also recognized and in turn awarded as one of HR Rising Stars. As a millennial HR thought leader, he is regularly invited to deliver keynotes at conferences globally. Today, we are very fortunate to have Sam with us here today to talk a bit more about personal branding. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to having a chat, Adrian. Yep.
Great. So to kick off, maybe for those people who are still not familiar, could you help us to understand about personal branding? What exactly is personal branding and why does it matter to people?
So, personal branding has become quite a hyped up term, right, in recent years where people use it for everything and everything under the sun, essentially. But if you think about it, at the very core of it, it's really about your reputation, right? What are you known for? What do people say about you? What is top of mind when people think of your name as a person? So, that's really essentially at the very core of it, what personal branding is all about. And why is it so important? I think that's something we'll expand a bit further. But essentially, everyone, regardless whether you're an entrepreneur, you're a corporate employee, whether you're a student, pretty much everyone, in particular for those who are still working, essentially, right? Having a personal brand will help you grow your career. I'll expand a bit further later, but I'll leave it as such for now. Yeah.
Having said that, personal branding seems to be something that only came out probably over the past few years. In, I would say, probably a decade or even 2 decades ago, just to play safe, this term would not have occurred in the mind of many. What has changed throughout this time that actually resulted in personal branding becoming more important and at the lips of almost everyone out there?
I would say a lot of it starts from, typically for Asia itself at this moment, a lot of us, we take reference from the West. And because of proliferation of social media, in particular LinkedIn, I would say over the past 10 years or so, this has become quite a big piece, right? How do you build a personal brand online, in particular LinkedIn, especially for corporate employees, and of course for influencers on IG or TikTok these days, right? How can you use your presence online for a start, right, to grow your presence? So I think because of that, because of the influencer market itself as well, we've seen personal branding become quite a hot topic and something that adds on value essentially at a very tangible level to a person's career.
So for personal branding, is it something that just require you to turn up on the internet, just have an account on LinkedIn, since we are talking more about professional stuff, or even for some people, maybe IG or maybe even TikTok? What differentiate anyone who just put up a post out there versus someone who is actually trying hard to work towards personal branding?
I would say there's one common misperception that most people think that personal branding, it's only about your social media presence. So let me just debunk that a little bit, right? Most people think about that where, hey, I just need to post a few things online. I need to try my best to go viral. Then I become popular, I become like a celebrity overnight. And that's my personal brand. But that's only one part of it because when it comes to personal brand, if we break it down further, right, or just in the simplest form, that's the online, offline bit, right? Online meaning whichever platform you are in, right, or on essentially, what kind of content do you put out? What kind of personality do you show? How do you interact with people? how do you respond to others in that sense, right? That's one way that people perceive you, and that adds on to your personal brand, right? Because at the very beginning, like I mentioned, personal branding is what people think and say about you, especially when you're not in the room, and it's your reputation. So using social media is a way, I mean, it's a channel essentially, right? To this day and age, compared to, let's say, 40 years ago, where there's no social media, these days, social media is like a vehicle that gets our message across to more people outside of a geography at a faster rate, just a fingertip essentially. It's something that's great, but we need to be mindful that it's not everything, right? So that's one part of it, social media itself, which is a vehicle. The second bit is then let's go back to the basics. You can have the most prolific profile online. For example, let's say I have 20,000 followers. I position myself as like, wow, the cool leader, the very knowledgeable person. But hey, one day, Adrian met me in person. And then Adrian realized Sam is not exactly what he is when I see him online and in person, right? Sam actually doesn't know anything. He's just lifting off content online. He got all the ghostwriter to write for him, and he's not really the kind person that we think he is. So that's where the disconnect happens, right? So essentially, when we talk about personal branding, we need to think of both aspects externally from the social media bit, the online bit, right? How do you build a brand that's authentic? How do you build a brand that's consistent, that tells people what you stand for, what value you can deliver? And then in person, when you connect, right? How do you then showcase that it's real? Because ultimately, there's still a bit of gap. I mean, while social media is great, right? It helps you to reach people that is beyond your imagination. Like for me, reaching people in the States, in Middle East and stuff like that, I probably won't get to meet them on a regular basis. But because of social media, it helps me. But then on the offline part is then where you build the real connection, in my opinion, right? Do you pay attention to taking your relationship online to offline? So even a Zoom call, I'll take it as offline, essentially, right? How do you take it offline? Because only through the offline engagement will you be able to build that deeper connection that really kind of ingrains in people's heart essentially what you stand for. Because what you see online essentially is more at the surface, right? Wow, I feel this guy is great story, I connect to some extent. But only when you connect offline, you share your story, they know you as a person, they feel that realness in you. That's where the brand really, really sinks in my opinion. So it's kind of a 1-2 combo, I would say, online, offline, to ensure that you have holistic and aligned essentially brand itself.
I like what you shared earlier on. Essentially, it is what people will say about you when you're not in the room, which I guess also means that in terms of the messaging, in terms of what you say, it has to be in a very consistent manner. Meaning to say you are always saying the same thing over and over again, which of course will lead people to think of you in a certain way. Does it also mean I can no longer post about my exercise regime, the lunch that I eat on my social media? Although I don't see a lot of likes for my lunch every day, but I believe there's a huge fan base of people out there who wants to know what I'm eating for lunch.
So I think there are multiple responses to Adrian, your question, right? So first part is then, is it okay? I think the only person that can answer that is yourself, because when it comes to personal brand, it's personal, right? It's really about what you truly stand for. All of us have to go to meals. All of us have to sleep. All of us have to take care of family. We have the unglam side and the glam side, for example. On social media, I think it's often overly glamorized that, hey, I only can show the great side, which is why you always see all the success stories typically. But in recent times, I think we've seen the extreme end, which is people trying to open up all the ugly side of themselves, which is a bit too much at times. They dig out all the personal stuff that is actually not even necessary to share, right? I mean, one of the thing that a friend of mine shared, personal friend of mine shared, which was quite useful, I thought. In terms of content and information, there are 3 levels. One level is public. What I share with everyone else that everyone can know is fine. It's still the truth, obviously, but that's what everyone sees. Next level is the private level, meaning for public, they don't see it, but close network, close friends, like, both of us, for example, I can tell you that, right? That's something that's a private level. And at the secret level, which are things that basically, even if I tell you there's no value and it's going to cause harm to me, basically, or my family even. So these are things that we need to be mindful. When we talk about authentic, when we talk about vulnerable, which is something that's hot in the past few years in particular, be also mindful that, there are certain things that no one needs to know, essentially. And more importantly, it's about you. You shouldn't be implicating others in the process of revealing all this so-called dark secrets of personal stuff. I think that's one thing that we need to pay attention to. So back to Adrian's question, right? It's great to have actually multiple facets of your life because, right, let's say for LinkedIn, increasingly we've realized that, people like stories that are more personal as compared to just articles, just products and, some awards that you won. Obviously, those are still great. It's still aligned to what the LinkedIn brand is all about. But why do people start paying attention to your personal life? What do you do? What do you eat? or who you hang out with, for example. That's because online, like I mentioned just now, is cold. That's a distant. But if you bring a bit of that personal life, you bring the realness to it once again. I think the key thing is about the realness part of it. People relate to you a lot more. They feel that they're
Mm.
not talking to a chatbot. They're not talking to a very distant figure, but someone that they can relate to, right? So I think if you're trying to build a personal brand at this moment, at least for regular corporate employees, like us, for example, or entrepreneurs, for instance, that relatability is so powerful because that leads to trust. And personal branding wise, I think at the core of it, once again, right, is what people say and think about you, but do they trust you in terms of what you say? And that can open up a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities. So I think that's where, it's okay to share whatever you want to share. And
Mhm.
obviously, different platforms, people look for different things, right? So for example, IG, people look for more glamorous photos, for example. So maybe you want
Mm.
to share about your nice food, your holiday. And these are things that because of what people are looking for, the attention span itself, right? That actually helps you get more engagement. So that's one aspect. LinkedIn, for example, they're looking for more professional content, maybe more stories revolving around career growth. That's where you want to put that kind of content over there, right? Facebook could be more family, a bit more trolling, for example. You can add a bit of light humor there. I know Adrian's very good at all this humorous stuff, so check him out, So multiple facets, different platforms, and that gives the holistic you in some sense. And that's where after that, when you meet offline, people kind of know who you are, when before you even meet them, which is what is really great about all these social media platforms for me at least, right? Is that I'm not the most extroverted, not the most social butterfly kind of person. But because of my effort to build social media presence, my personal brand on LinkedIn in particular, and of course IG, Facebook, and all the platforms, my followers kind of know who I stand for and what I am essentially. And when we meet for the first time, they always tell me this thing. It seems like I know you for a long time. The last night I talk about this and that. It creates that trust straight away, and it opens up doors very readily. So that's really what I encourage to Adrian's question. It's okay to share, right? A lot of different facets of you, but know what's the limit. That's one. Try not to reveal too much to the extent where it's going to implicate your family, for example. And find the right platforms to communicate the right message or what people are looking for so that it builds up the total image for you essentially.
I'm curious to hear from you. What are some of the examples of postings that you believe has crossed the line? The one that you put under the secret bucket where should not have been posted to begin with.
Okay. That's a good question. So I think secret bucket, I think for individuals, um, it of course varies, right? But it could be, for example, like somebody posting that, hey, um, I've once committed maybe this crime or something like that, or I once hurt someone so deeply in that sense where, to be honest, I don't really know that, right? I mean, it's something really personal, and maybe talking about your family, your mom is really sick and stuff. I think all these are things that you don't really need to say, to be very honest,
Hmm.
right? And the litmus test is this, right? Whenever I post something, I ask a very simple question: does this post or this piece of content add any value to my audience? So it doesn't matter whether it's a personal post or a professional post. So for example, if I post about my son, the intention is always about advocating for fatherhood. It's always about
Hmm.
how, my involvement as a father, how much joy I have and what I feel, we are losing out if we don't be involved, for example, right? So that's really where I'm coming from. And of course, professionally, it's always about, um, what experience I went through, what has went well for me, what has kind of caused me to fail in certain aspects, and this is some of my lessons. So I'm hoping that someone in a similar situation or approaching that situation, when they read the content, when they engage with it, they take away something useful.
And of course, to know that they are not the only one out there. It helps to help
Absolutely.
let them relate to someone that is actually going through the same thing. And I think that helped to minimize the kind of pain, anguish, or worry that they have in their head. So let's break it down for our audience here. Because what we've shared so far, I would say it's in a way good in theory, a bit conceptual, but
Mm.
for some people, they may not know what are the technical steps to take. So let's
Yep.
break it down for them. Past 3 days, what have you posted?
Past 3 days. Wow, that's a good question because I post a lot of things. Okay, let me just quickly check myself. Let me see. I've shared quite a few stories, I believe. Let me just do a quick check.
So
See, that's the
while you're
problem,
doing
right?
that, maybe you can help the audience understand. So you're on
Yes.
LinkedIn, you're
LinkedIn,
on IG,
Facebook, and IG. Yep.
Facebook, and IG. Okay, so 3 platforms.
Yep.
Okay. Don't have to be
TikTok
that
as well, actually,
accurate, lah.
but not super
Whatever
active.
you
Yeah,
can
lah.
recall.
Okay, so let me just share one. Okay, so this one recently I just posted yesterday. I mentioned about my journey, right? When I was younger, I've always wanted to be an inventor. So I shared a personal
Mhm.
journey. But I realized that I'm not very scientifically or engineering inclined. I don't have that. that nerve for it, apparently. So what happened was along the way, I knew that wasn't the right path for me. So I went into marketing and HR in school. And by hook or by crook, by chance, I became a HR professional. And after many years down the road, I became an entrepreneur that does employer branding. I manage brands for organizations. And it kind of goes back to my childhood where I was thinking about creating something. Because at the core of being an inventor is about creating new stuff. So I think the key message that I was trying to tell through this short story itself was then, all of us, we may start with something and we may get disappointed along the way that we don't achieve it supposedly. But at the core of it, if we really break it down in the simplest form, right, it can proliferate or be seen in another parallel universe of sort, another role, which is like, instead of being an inventor, I become now a creator of people enablement, of creator of stories, for example, which I really enjoy a lot these days. So that was the short message that I kind of posted, and yeah, people kind of responded to share me, hey, I really appreciate the story. It made me realize that, hey, I can actually do something else. So that was quite powerful for me, actually.
Okay, and this one went out onto your
LinkedIn.
Your LinkedIn. Okay, then let's move to your IG and see what you've posted there.
IG, okay, let me just do a quick check then. So IG usually is a bit more personal, right? But usually I try to give a bit more motivational stuff. So one of the more recent one was about just a very short quote. I mentioned, don't just tell stories, tell meaningful stories. And I say, start with the end in mind, know what your audience is looking for, trigger emotions, drive change. So I think, why am I having a shorter post usually, right, for IG? Because that's what people look for. They don't really read that much usually, but look for nice photos. So similarly, I think it's about value, right? I want to ensure that whatever message I put across, right, while I customize it according to different platforms, it's still consistent in terms of the value, in terms of target audience that I want to attract, the target audience that I want to impact, essentially. I think one common mistake is that a lot of people think that, hey, I want to capture everyone. But the thing is, when you try to capture everyone, you capture no one. That's the truth. When I first started, I tried to do a lot of things, but in the end, the lack of focus led me to not achieving much, to be honest. So once I start streamlining, in fact, day to day now, from business point of view, I'm still constantly trying to contract my service offerings and try to narrow down things even further so that you really carve a niche. The narrower it is, the better it is. So that people really think of you just specifically for the area, and it opens up a lot of doors from there as well.
You mentioned some of the things that you tried in the beginning because you were just trying to cover all grounds. Which are the ones that you tried and didn't really work for you and hence you dropped them off?
Okay, so at the start, when I first started my consultancy firm, that's the first company itself, I tried to do everything across HR. So, okay, if you have any HR problem, come to me and stuff like that. Because I had about 7 years of HR experience doing quite a wide range of stuff, quite deep in fact as well. So I thought, yes, I can do pretty much everything. But then the problem, like I said, most people would then think of me just, hey, the HR guy who's passionate, but what is he known for? Nothing much. So then interestingly, what happened was along the way, what I've learned is that the market kept coming to me to talk about one topic, millennial engagement. So then I realized, oh, because I'm a millennial, I'm a speaker talking about HR, people naturally link me as the millennial HR guy that talks about employee engagement, for example. That's where I kind of zoom into the area for a start because I knew that was like a door opener to get me to a lot of opportunities. And then that's where I can open up to say, these are the other things that I can do if you need. So that was kind of a quick journey that I thought was quite useful, actually.
Okay, which of course led you to drop the rest of the stuff so that you can really have laser focus on this specific spectrum, which truly makes sense. So now I want to bring the attention to our audience here, and perhaps we can start off by having a persona. So for people who might be keen in personal branding, embarking on personal branding, but have not really taken even the first baby step. So I know our audience come from different walks of life, although most of them will be millennials, but let's create a fictitious persona. Okay, let's look at Tim. Tim is a 35-year-old network engineer. For some reason, wants to look into personal branding.
Okay.
So based on our limited understanding of what a network engineer does and all that, I think it's still okay, but we can try to perhaps guide him in how he should approach his personal branding starting from today when he's starting from ground zero.
So typically how I like to start off, right, is a very simple framework. I call it the VISA framework. VISAA. V stands for values. So first and foremost, usually what I try to find out is, what is important to him. So Tim, assuming Adrian, your team, right? So I ask Tim, so what is actually important to you? You might say, oh, for me, it's about job title. For me, it's about career growth or it's personal growth, for example. And then that's where we kind of try to dig deeper to understand, right? Why is job title, why is personal growth so important? I'll give a simple example. For example, someone who say, I want to be a CEO by 30, right? You then ask, why so? Why is it so important to be CEO by 30, right? He or she can then say, oh, because I'll have influence, I have that $1 million. So why is influence and that money so important? Because I want to, buy things that I feel that, it's important to me, things that can give my family a comfortable lifestyle, for example. And then why is that so important for them is, oh, because my family came from very poor background, maybe, and my parents took a lot of hardship to raise me up, and I want to take care of them. And so you see, from a very high level, a job title, right? If you break it down further by doing a coaching session itself, you actually understand that at the core of it, it's not really the job title. The job title is a means to end to kind of support the family, which is the core of what team actually needs, for example. So that's the first thing that we usually establish, the values. What's really important to first understand that bit. So that's the first one. Secondly, I is actually interest. We want to know Tim, right? What actually excites Tim on a day-to-day basis, right? What allows him to go to work excited every day, or what prevents him from dragging his feet? So some people, for example, like Tim, he may say that, oh, I love processes, I love data, for example. And that's where we know from personal brand point of view, these are areas that we need to zoom in for him and try to leverage on that to keep him interested to constantly advocate something he's passionate about. So that's I. S stands for strengths. What comes naturally to Tim, right? What is he good at? Or what do people say he's really great at, for example? So maybe Tim, he may be very shy, but he's a very trustworthy person. People feel like, as long as I look at your face, I trust you, I can tell you all my darkest secrets, for example. So that's something he needs to play to his strength and build it as part of the persona itself, right? First A is then aspiration. In terms of looking forward, what does success look like to Tim? Right? It's not like the typical HR question, where do you see yourself 5 years time, the promotion, or whatever. But if you just close your eyes now, all of you, right? How does success look like, or what do you hear when you think about success, right? Is it just relaxing on the beach, which is maybe financial freedom? Is it still working at the age of 70 but feeling great about yourself? Is it about having a happy family that, it's not about money, but people just having all the grandchildren, the children, and having everyone together in a very complete family, for example? Success is different to every single one, and perhaps different phase of life, it could change as well. So that's the A. Second A is then, of course, after you understand your VISA, right? A is aspiration, is more the end goal itself, right? What is the action plan? So typically when you think of aspiration, let's say I want to be CEO by 30, for example, then most people will say, no, it seems I'm not achieving anything, I'm not getting even closer, because they're thinking of just a one step quantum leap. Action plan is there to kind of break it down further for you into bite size, into achievable, tangible blocks. For example, if I'm 25 now, I want to go to 30 within 5 years. What are some things I need to do to get there as a CEO? One could be I need to build up my financial literacy. One could be I need to understand my P&L very well. One could be in terms of personal branding. One could be public speaking, whatever it is, right? So that second A is essentially help you to break down what are small tangible steps so that, right? So that once I achieve one of them, I feel good. I know there's progress. And then human nature, right? It motivates me to want to do more, and I feel getting closer and closer and closer and closer. So the VISA framework, values, interest, strengths, aspiration, and action plan, is usually the first thing I always focus on to help my coaches or mentees essentially to understand, right? What do you stand for at the deepest level first, before we talk about how can we pick up all these things to make up a persona, a brand that makes sense, at least at that point of time.
It does mix. It actually sounds like the same thing you will go through when you want to craft a new resume, because the things that you're going to put there appears to be similar on this journey of personal branding. And another thing that actually come to my mind: what if through this process, the individual actually realize there are something that he or she may not be able to achieve because it's just not in them. So, for example, perhaps this person is not analytical at all, but the job that has been planned for require deep analytical work. So there are some friction between your true values versus the core requirement or the prerequisite of the job. How do you reconcile that?
I think essentially, if you talk about this, it's something like what we call the ikigai, right? Isn't it? I just spoke about this quite recently in Clubhouse. You need to kind of find that intersection, right, between what you're passionate about, what you're good at, and versus what the market really needs and they want to pay you for, essentially. So I think a lot of times why this actually happens, I mean, there are multiple reasons. One is, of course, you kind of fake it, right, till you try to make it essentially where you overclaim these are things you can do. And when you go in, you realize you cannot achieve that. That's one thing. Second thing is then perhaps your job scope expanded and you were not well equipped or developed enough to actually reach that kind of level, which is where I think a lot of conversations have to happen with your supervisor, with your leader itself. So I think that's typically one key issue. So from a personal brand point of view, I would say you should keep it as real as possible, because similar to the first point I mentioned, right? If you try to oversell yourself, what happens is that, yes, people may believe in you, but when they meet you, right, expectation versus reality creates that distrust and frustration. And that's the
Hmm.
last thing you want. And that, in fact, damages your personal brand.
Right. And for people who are using personal brand, or rather at different stage of their career. So let's start with the first batch, which is on career search. Would personal brand actually be useful in any way? Because career search seems to be quite transactional. I will go out and try to find something. Or do you think otherwise, that it should still be something that you should build upon and perhaps try to cash in on when the time arises?
So I'll just put it in perspective, right? Most people think that career search is me having to submit resume, looking at job boards, and asking for referral. What if it's the other way around? People are searching for you instead. That is what personal branding is really all about. You want to build a brand strong enough that you need no introduction, essentially. So, like for example, if Adrian goes out, well, people think of him as a HR tech expert, the future of work strategies, for example, without him introducing himself, right? So that's something you want to think about. How do you build a personal brand so strong enough that opportunities come to you? You're like a talent, a lead magnet, essentially. Rather than you having to struggle, go and apply for jobs and stuff, and having to pitch for yourself. Obviously, I'm not saying that you don't have to totally pitch for yourself. Even if the strongest personal brand, to some extent, you still have to kind of convince others. What I'm saying is that with a strong personal brand, from a career search perspective, it helps to shift the dynamics a lot more towards your favor. So even if you're applying for a job, okay, let's say I apply for a job today, people know who I am in the HR space. Chances are there's a high chance they want to meet me, and everything that I say holds a bit more weight. And rather than people thinking, is that really true? Is Sam really trying to smoke me or something like that? So that's the part that helps from a credibility point of view and from a recommendation point of view. And also, if you have a strong personal brand, chances are if there's a job opening somewhere, people naturally think about you straight away. Remember I mentioned on top of mind, opportunity will come because of that. A lot of my opportunities along the way, right, came without me searching for it. And it's because I constantly focus a lot on building a brand that, I give back, I build value for others, I let people know exactly what I do or things that I do essentially. And when the opportunity comes, I'm at the top of those people's mind. So career search, think of it as, does it always have to be you searching for the job? Why can't you be the one creating the lead for people to search for you instead?
So in a way, try to SEO yourself so
In a
that
way,
you'll be
in a
on
way.
the page one of Google search. So I believe I've shared this in a previous episode. So in my previous job with a HR tech company, I actually got the job because of personal branding. So
Mm.
because of the things I've written and wrote about on HR tech when I was in India over at an event, HR tech event. My ex-colleague actually recognized me as I was walking down the aisle, and they invited me to the booth, and from the booth to the office to discuss about them opening office in Singapore. They would like someone to come in to help them, and the rest is history. So that is one. It's just one example, but one of the many examples that personal branding definitely helped. And because of what they perceive of me, it really helped to accelerate the entire conversation as well. So that's on the career search part. Now, for people who have already achieved where they want to be in life and may not necessarily be in a role where they need to sell something. So I can understand if I'm a salesperson, I may
Mm.
still have to build up my brand in on personal on LinkedIn and all that because I may want to connect with certain prospects. But what if I'm in a back end role? Let's say I'm an accountant.
Mm.
Do I still need to maintain this? I'm an accountant that became an accountant. I'll become an accountant and I'm happy there. But do I still need to continuously work on my personal branding? Because it seems like I will still be an accountant. Maybe I will rise up to be a FC. I'm not sure. But would it make sense for someone like that?
Maybe I just ask you a simple question, right? Because now you're working in a corporate setup pretty much, right? Is there a go-to person that you can think of just off your mind now that if you need to, let's say, get some help with, you will look for this person, for example? Is there anyone off your mind in your team or within the company?
It depends on what kind of help, but definitely if it's IT, be this person.
Mm.
Anything related to say video production will be that person.
And if you need to, let's say, have a coffee chat around, just something casual, would you find somebody in particular as well?
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely.
Right? So all this is actually personal branding play.
Hmm.
What do I mean, right? Personal brand is not just about telling people what you can do, or rather the corporate brand part of it, right? But it's also about who you are as a person. So for example, if let's say I'm not an IT guy, but I'm very savvy with social media, right? So I'm known as a social media guy in the company, even though that's not my scope of work. Naturally, when you have a social media problem or if a social media hack that you need to find out, you come to me. That's a brand I built up. Doesn't matter what my rank is, doesn't matter what my scope is. And if, for example, I'm a guy that constantly helps you, for example, no matter what you ask for, I'm known as the giving guy without question. When you need help, naturally you come to me because I won't reject you, right? That is personal brand in play essentially. So as an accountant, even regardless whether accountant back end, front end, right? Even if you're not looking for promotion or looking for a job, you want to build a personal brand that, to some extent, if I want to put it in that way, safeguard your interest as well or achieve the kind of objective you want to achieve. So, for example, if your objective is I just want a stable job, don't come and disturb me or stuff like that, you want to create a personal brand that hey, I just do my job properly, but I'm not those that perhaps go the extra mile because to me it's just a job and I need that work-life balance, right? So it's very clear. So once people think of that brand, they know that okay, outside office hour, I won't come to you because I respect your boundaries, for example. So these are things that people often don't think about, but this is the offline bit where your day-to-day interaction, things that you do, how you respond, how you react to all these things actually builds up personal brand in a very subtle manner where people associate you with something or disassociate you with something.
Hmm. Okay, that truly makes sense in trying to really build up your usefulness as a person and just continuously to build up that bank account of usefulness so as
Yep.
to improve your performance or maybe just to improve your overall relationship with other people. Now, going back to others who may be keen to embark on this personal branding journey, you mentioned earlier on for some of your posting out there, or rather for all of your posting out there, there's an objective in mind. There's an end objective in mind, and there's
Yep.
also certain theme. Like on IG, you'll be posting something related to fatherhood, for example. So let's assume I more or less figure out all this kind of stuff. But there are some people whom I speak with, they are a bit worried about actually writing something because they are afraid that it may make them sound silly, it may
Yep.
offend some people, or they just cannot deal with the kind of flaming online. And I'd like to share this thing with you. I may not have shared it with you, but the first time I actually got my professional flame, I say professional because it was on LinkedIn. I
Okay.
spent a day thinking and pondering on how to roast this couple of guys back. One full day, zero productivity.
Okay.
End of the day, I couldn't think of anything. I've also cooled down and I realized I would just ignore them. And I realized I should have ignored them to begin with. But having said that, that is my story. I'm not sure how you would relate to it in terms of people who are quite hesitant on trying to push out something.
So that's actually a very common thing. I mean, for myself included, for a lot of people that I mentored along the way for personal branding as well. Myself, just for example, when I first started out my LinkedIn journey, I was still in a corporate setup, kind of months before I left the corporate setup. A mentor of mine taught me that, hey, you need to be more, put yourself out a little bit more on LinkedIn, right? Share articles, share thoughts. First thing that came to my mind was then, who the hell would listen to someone who's like so young, not even senior and don't have much experience in the HR space, right? And that was my natural kind of imposter syndrome, the natural fear itself. What helped me, I mean, long story short, what helped me overcome that fear was a very simple thing. It was about the intention. Once I realized that my purpose of sharing the content or the intention of sharing content is about value adding my audience, it's about helping others in the similar situation like I mentioned or approaching a similar situation, it unlocked my discomfort essentially. Because one thing is that I'm not claiming that I'm an expert. I'm not saying that whatever I say is right. I'm not saying that this is the only way to solve the problem, right? I'm just saying that this is my experience, this has worked out for me, or this didn't work out for me, and I hope that this works out for you or something that is useful for you. And if it doesn't, let me know why, and I want to learn from you, right? So I think that kind of unlocked a lot of my discomfort where I start with the right intention. So I think the part about intention makes a lot of difference, and it's something I'll share a lot with my coaches and mentees as well. And one more thing is then once you have unlocked the intention, right? Um, Constantly build on that to constantly give value. And I always believe in this: never call yourself an expert or guru unless people call you an expert or guru. Because plenty of so-called fake gurus, fake experts out there. Just because they've been to China for 2 years, they call themselves a China expert. Just because they're in HR for 1 year, they call themselves HR thought leader, whatever it is, right? So I think there are plenty of people out there. It damages that credibility, and there's a lot of skepticism because of that. So what's really powerful from a personal brand point of view, from a getting started point of view, just type the intention to share, intention to give, intention to support and help. That builds up goodwill. that helps you to establish the trust and credibility over time because you're consistently putting out content in a similar space. Of course, it's not identical content, but similar space. People think of you as expert because you're well versed in that particular area.
That would definitely make a lot of sense for people who are thinking of moving forward the needle in their personal branding. And I'm imagining right now for people who are in larger corporation, especially those who may have a very overzealous corporate communication team.
Yep,
Some
yep.
people may be very worried, oh, can post or not? With my PRC, my Copcom C, and then make some noise out of it. What are some of the advice you may give to people who are in larger multinational companies that may potentially face such a problem?
So I've worked with a lot of multinationals on the brand ambassador program where they expect individuals to kind of post online, right? This is the number one question usually after the workshop that we train them. What are the do's and don'ts? Right? So typically from a corporate comms perspective, there's always a guideline, a corporate guideline in terms of what you can share, what you cannot share. And if I look at it in the simplest form across all the organizations I work with, in particular multinationals, it's really about not revealing the secrets of the company, right? What product is being launched or some of the behind the scenes um, product related stuff. But nothing is stopping them from sharing the cultural stuff, usually, right? And nothing is stopping you from sharing a conversation that is not P and C essentially. So I think most people always think that, oh, if I talk about professional, you always have to talk about my work specifically, but there are multiple dimensions to your work. And I always say content, right? There's plenty of inspiration from your everyday life. Conversation with Adrian now, what happened just now during dinner with my son, in my shower, what I was thinking, a book that I read, a reply that I had on social media. All these touch points are essentially inspiration for you to create content already. And when it comes to personal branding, there's no need to always talk purely about work. I mean, even like talk about your personal reflection. Let's say I read a book, right? Or maybe I went out to buy my dinner today or something, and a conversation between me and the store owner happened, and it helped me reflect about something, for example. All this can be content to share, and the most important thing is through all these different walks of life, different touch points itself, how do you then tie back, right, to kind of the main topics or the main pillars they're focusing on? I think that's where it's the gist of it is something that's really, really important.
And across the many different channels right now, and again, I think I want to gravitate more towards LinkedIn, given that
Sure.
it's a professional
Hmm.
platform. So over and above what you just shared in terms of putting out your content, of course, having an end in mind and all that, are there any specific hacks, tricks, or tips for pro users in a sense that may still want to gain that 1-2% mileage to better everyone out there? Are there any new features or new things that you think it would be worth their time to check out to try to craft their posting different, maybe font change and all that has worked for you?
So I think the multiple hacks, I mean, one like Adrian mentioned, it's about the font and the bolding. So I think one very simple way to capture attention because especially on mobile phone, right? Things are really small. When you scroll through, you don't really see much, and attention span is really short. So having something that captures attention. So the first thing is about the hook, right? When you talk about storytelling, talk about social media content, it's the hook. What captures your attention? It can be a nice image. It can be an interesting video. It can be a interesting caption, a title. It can be bolded. It can be interesting font, right? All these are very quick ways to capture attention. So that's the first part. So the other part is then I realized multiple ways of creating content. One is then increasingly what I've seen in the market, storytelling kind of content where you tell personal reflections, journey, as compared to just articles or just sharing like a random one-liner statement kind of thing. It captures a lot of people's attention and engagement is usually much better. In fact, that was kind of the turning point for my LinkedIn journey where I was actually getting very average engagement, not getting much attention. And one day I was thinking to myself, what are other people, successful people supposedly on social media, at least, right, LinkedIn, doing differently from me? I started observing, I realized that a lot of them that are doing really well told a lot of personal stories. And that's why I started pivoting, learning more about storytelling. And because of that, everything went up, followers, engagement. And because of that, people seem to know me a lot better. So of course, storytelling comes in different shapes and forms, but that was one of the kind of pivotal point when it comes to content creation, the style of it essentially.
Okay. Could you give an example? Just pick a very boring topic, but try to present a story around it versus, which is a good example, versus a bad example on how people would tend to just throw it out there and, of course, not get any engagement.
Okay, so for example, interview, the most recent one. What happened was, okay, it was this person who applied for a job, and this person came from one of my ex-clients' company. So if I put a very boring post, right, I could just say, oh, someone applied for a job with me, but when I asked my ex-client, they said that, oh, she wasn't that good, so I decided not to just not interview her. So as simple as that, right? It can sound really very straightforward and boring. I mean, like there's no emotions, there's anything. So how did I spice out a little bit? How did I bring a bit more excitement to storytelling? Was then I took them through a bit of a journey. That I mentioned that, okay, so someone applied, and I started with a header. I think something along the line where, your personal branding is so important because something like whatever people says about you, affects your opportunities or credibility along that line. So start with a hook. Instead of just telling a story point blank, start with a hook to get people thinking first. I think the key thing when it comes to storytelling is about how do you engage them right from the beginning. Whether it's a question, whether it's a thought-provoking statement that they may or may not agree with, that's a good start actually. So that was how I kind of started. Then I share a bit of journey that, hey, I went through this journey, I talked to this person, that person. And at the end, I got to share like a reflection that, hey, personal branding is really so important. And got people to have a call to action essentially, which is, are you thinking of building a personal branding now? And do you think that personal branding is important, for example? So the whole thing is about creating a flow, a structure, right? How do you get people engaged at the beginning? And how do you create a call to action at the very end with the whether it's interesting or boring content essentially? And that kind of forms a relatively engaging post, I would say.
So it's really trying to wrap a story around it with, of course, an objective in mind, like you keep mentioning,
Yep,
in
yep.
order to appeal better to the readers out there. I'm just going to pause here for a second and encourage our listeners, our audience. If you have any questions, feel free to put into the chat. Sam will be more than happy to address and answer any of your questions related to personal branding. Now, moving on, for one question that, in fact, the producer just ping in is,
Sure.
in terms of sharing other people's content versus creating your own content and sharing it, what's better and what has shown better result?
So I would say in a very straightforward answer wise, sharing your content is still the best because people relate to you and it builds out their personal brand. When it's really valuable to actually share other people's content is when you actually provide your own perspective. So I think one common mistake in particular LinkedIn is that a lot of people think that, oh, I just need to share the article and that's about it. That's me creating a piece of content. Logically, they're not wrong. They created a piece of content, but is that a useful piece of content that adds to your personal brand? Right? That's a question they should actually ask themselves. So typically for a start, I always encourage people to create organic content, whether it's a personal experience, whether it's a lesson, whether it's sharing article to share a reflection. That's the most valuable, to be honest, to build up personal brand because that's where people know your point of view. That's where they seem to know you a bit better. They get connected you closer. If you want to share somebody else's post, let's say Adrian posted something interesting, right? And I really want to share it. What I'll encourage you to do is then, beyond just sharing, just clicking share and that's about it. Try to provide some commentary, right? Why do you agree with Adrian? Why do you disagree with him? What do you like about his post? And maybe were there any further reflections or question that you want to ask your audience itself? So these are things that you want to think about because ultimately you're trying to build your brand, not trying to build someone else's brand. But when it comes to personal branding, how do you build it is when you add value to others. So it may not be a post. It can be, let's say, me commenting on Adrian's post because that captures his attention. It adds to the whole conversation. And Adrian feels like, hey, I actually take the time and effort to engage him. Then that's where my value is created for him in particular. And that's where the relationship slowly tightens. Because over time, right, if you realize that, hey, this person constantly engages my posts, comments, and gives me that the support, chances are you try to reciprocate in one way or another, right? If the person actually drops you a private message, chances are you will reply him. As compared to a cold message that say, can you give me a job? Can you do this and that? You're probably going to ignore that, right? So it can be the same message, but because of the relationship that has been built through either your content that you shared, the comments they provided, or some kind of value that you've given, essentially, that relationship takes up that trust to a new level altogether.
One of the key things, of course, when it comes to posting, would definitely be the matrix that you can see, the number of people who likes it, the number of people who have shared, and of course the comments. And going across to some other platform, I would say maybe this is happening more on Facebook, where there are people who borders on influencing, posting very strong opinions, and are getting a lot of traffic for it. But having said that, some of these opinions can be a bit divisive,
Yep.
and a bit controversial. You have
Yep.
people like Kelvin Chang, You
Yep.
also have people like the critical spectator getting a lot of views, a
Yep.
lot of followership, a lot of likes, but extremely controversial view, which are either very left leaning or right leaning. Uh, for someone who may be thinking of going into that direction, what's your take on that?
I would say once again it goes back to what's your objective, right? And your context itself. Because there's no one size fit all model answer essentially, right? Even though in Singapore we always believe in model answers. So for those people who are like trying to become influencers, because influencers typically they need a lot of attention. Sometimes controversial engagements is even better for them because they like it, right? That's where controversy actually makes a lot of sense. But for most of us who are in the corporate world, for example, right, we don't want that. I mean, there's a fine line, right? I always tell my corporate clients there's a fine line between controversy or controversial, right, versus thought provoking. So thought provoking is great for corporate or people having a career in the corporate entrepreneurship space because it gets people thinking, it establishes credibility. Controversial wise, you can get a lot of supporters because people believe in, like you said, the left or right side kind of supporter thing, right? But then you can create a lot of haters, which you may not actually want because you're not in a celebrity or influencer space. So that's something to think about from a context perspective and from a thought provoking versus controversial perspective because not everyone needs to be controversial. And it's not always, right, about getting high engagement. If I have to compromise the matrix, the engagement, um, as compared to the trust, right, I'll go for the trust. I'd rather get fewer followers, but get quality followers. People that trust me will be my word of mouth advocates compared to people who are just trolling. I get high engagement, but you realize probably all trolls, all the different nonsense over there and just trend jacking the post itself. And that's not going to be value add me anyway, right? So think of your context, think of what helps you the most, what's your objective, and then go with the approach that suits you the best. Because once again, it's your personal brand.
So I hope with that, people can really take note and think about how they want to position themselves when it comes to personal branding, how they want to start, and of course, how it relates to your core values. Again, another shout out to our audience. If you have any questions, feel free to key it in. Our producer will flash it out so that Sam will be able to answer them. And towards our last segment here, of course, I also want to just quickly understand from you, is there any final takeaway you'd like to share with the audience who are still perhaps trying to improve their personal branding, sitting on the fence about it, or really require some assistance or some support? What do you have to share with them?
I think first and foremost, I encourage you to check out my LinkedIn. I think there are a lot of plenty of samples, examples, templates, even, right? In that sense, just take reference. I mean, it's free anyway. Whenever I share, I also hope that more people can feel inspired, which I'm really thankful that over time, a lot of people actually drop me private messages to say, thanks a lot for all this. Either it motivated me or give me some new ideas. So that's one channel I would encourage you to check it out. Of course, Adrian also creates a lot of great content, so do check out his content as well. The other bit is then, interestingly, um, this is the second year that I'm started Stories of Asia. It's a 2-year anniversary this month, and we're actually rolling out 20 giveaways in some sense, personal brand audit where I'll be talking to you one on one, for 30 minutes to give you a quick audit to understand what your brand is and give you some clarity. So stay tuned for that. I think what you can do is, if you're interested, drop me an email or connect me on LinkedIn, Sam Neo, SAMNEO, or just drop me an email at sam@storiesofasia.co. Let me know why do you want to build your personal brand. And within the month itself, we'll select 20 lucky winners for me to do a one-on-one personal brand audit with you. So that hopefully helps, some of the free giveaways for a start, to get the month started.
Great, and that's very generous of you, Sam. And thank you for mentioning me in using me as a reference for people who's looking to build a personal brand. But since both of us are in this chat, it may be perceived as selling koyo lah. So anyone else outside the two of us that you mentioned earlier on as well, there were people that you try to follow, try to draw reference from. Are there any existing personality people online that you would suggest for our audience to check out, just to learn from them and see what they're doing, the things that they're posting, to draw some reference for themselves?
So of course, selling koyo, right? I also like to support some other friends out there. So people like, if you search this guy, like Benjamin Low, for example, is a public speaker. He coaches on public speaking and stuff like that. Eric Feng, for example, shout out to Eric and Benjamin. Eric Feng is actually a sales trainer and sales consultant and expert in that space. All these are people that constantly create a lot of content. They share a lot of very good insights in terms of how can you, Ben Lo just came yesterday. Yeah, so I saw the comment over there. All these are great people, friends of mine that have done a lot of great work, right, in terms of creating value for people, building ecosystems, creating communities itself. So kudos to all of them, that constantly doing all this, even inspiring me to create some of my content as well. So check them out. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sam. And really, yes, those are the few people that I personally follow as well. Benjamin is an awesome guy. And most recently, I've also been following this lady, very young lady. She just started her first business, if I'm not wrong, in HR tech. And her name is Zelia Leong, if I'm not wrong. She basically started I can't really remember the name of a company, but she put this headline in her LinkedIn, which captured my attention. So over and above founder or co-founder of her company, she put / not a Forbes 30 under 30, which is of course trying to make play a spin to what a lot of people tend to overshare on their LinkedIn, on their social media. Oh, I'm a Forbes 30 over 30 under 30, 40 under 40, those kind of stuff. And a lot of humorous and funny content that she put out there. But again, there is an intention to it. It's not just trying to make a random joke out of nothing. So I would suggest people go and check her out as well. So to the end, thank you so much, Sam. Thank you for coming onto the show today to share with all the audience here, as well as myself. I've learned a lot today in trying to put together your intention, your objective, your angle, your values before going onto the scene to really play up your card on personal branding. Thank you so much for your time. And again, for all the audience out there, Sam mentioned earlier on, there will be this promotion that he's running. So do check him out on LinkedIn, get to know more about his company, what he does. He'll be more than happy to advise you on personal branding. With that, thank you, Sam. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest. Good night.